The alarm bells rang through Luna Command Station as Admiral Jake Morrison rushed to the communications center. The red lights flashed across the metal walls while officers ran to their positions. Commander Lisa Hayes stood at the main console, with her face pale and worried. "Sir, we have an incoming transmission from the Zephyrian Coalition," she said as Jake approached. "It's encrypted and marked as emergency priority." Jake nodded and activated the main screen. The image flickered before showing Ambassador Veltar, a tall alien with blue skin and large silver eyes. The ambassador's usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by obvious fear and desperation. "People of Earth," Veltar began, his voice shaking, "I speak to you in our darkest hour. The Korath Empire has begun a systematic campaign to destroy our civilization. They are not simply conquering our worlds, they are exterminating our people." Lisa translated the additional data streaming through the communication. "Admiral, they're sending us tactical reports and casualty numbers. The situation is worse than anything we've seen before." Jake studied the information flowing across his screen. 12 Zephyrian worlds had already fallen to the Korath forces. The reports showed mass executions, forced labor camps, and the complete destruction of civilian populations. This wasn't war, it was genocide. Captain Ryan Parker arrived from the Intelligence Division, carrying a thick folder of classified documents. "Sir, I've pulled everything we have on the Korath Empire. They've been expanding aggressively for over a century, enslaving entire species and stripping planets of resources." The briefing room filled with Earth's top military commanders as Ryan presented his analysis. The Korath commanded over 3,000 warships and had subjugated dozens of alien species. Their technology appeared superior to most galactic civilizations, and their military doctrine focused on total domination rather than simple conquest. "What exactly are the Zephyrians asking for?" Jake asked as he reviewed the tactical data. Lisa checked her translation systems. "They're not asking us to fight their war, Admiral. They know they can't win against the Korath. They're asking for help evacuating their remaining populations before the genocide is complete." The request seemed reasonable on the surface. The Zephyrians had been peaceful allies since first contact 3 years ago. They had shared technology and cultural exchanges with Earth, always showing respect for human sovereignty. Now they faced complete extinction. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Ryan consulted his intelligence reports. "Based on Korath movement patterns, they'll reach the last major Zephyrian strongholds within 6 weeks. After that, there won't be anyone left to evacuate." The transmission from Veltar continued with detailed coordinates of refugee camps and population centers. The ambassador explained that they had heard stories of human compassion and hoped that Earth might show mercy to a dying civilization. The Zephyrians believed that humanity represented something different in a galaxy dominated by violence and conquest. Jake called for an immediate meeting with the Terran Council. President Helen Carter convened an emergency session in the secure chamber beneath the White House. The debate that followed would determine not just Earth's response, but the future of human involvement in galactic affairs. "We've maintained neutrality in galactic conflicts for good reasons," argued Secretary of Defense William Stone. "Getting involved in this war could expose humanity to threats we're not prepared to handle." General Patricia Mills disagreed. "Mr. Secretary, we're not talking about a territorial dispute or trade war. This is genocide. Standing by while an entire civilization is exterminated goes against everything we claim to represent." The discussion continued for hours as military advisors presented various options. Some suggested limited humanitarian aid, while others proposed full military intervention. The intelligence reports painted a grim picture. The Korath Empire seemed unstoppable, having conquered everything in their path for decades. President Carter listened to all arguments before making her decision. "The United States and the Terran alliance cannot stand idle while genocide occurs. We will respond to the Zephyrian request for assistance." What the president didn't say, and what most of the council didn't know, was that this decision would reveal humanity's true nature to the galaxy. For 2 centuries, Earth had deliberately maintained the appearance of a minor, peaceful civilization. The Korath Empire was about to discover why that deception had been necessary. Admiral Morrison returned to Luna Command with his orders. He activated secure communication channels that hadn't been used since the early days of human space exploration. The messages went out to hidden military installations throughout the solar system, awakening systems that had been dormant for decades. Captain Amy Foster received her orders at the secret naval base on Europa. Her ship, the Terra's Wrath, had been disguised as a research vessel for the past 10 years. Now she began preparations to reveal its true nature as the most advanced battleship ever constructed. Similar orders went out to 11 other ships hidden throughout human space. To outside observers, Earth was assembling a small humanitarian fleet. The reality was very different. Each vessel represented technology that the galaxy had never encountered, weapon systems based on principles that other species hadn't even theorized. Commander Tony Walsh coordinated the fleet assembly from his position aboard the command ship. The 12 vessels that would respond to the Zephyrian crisis carried enough firepower to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. But that wasn't their primary mission. Dr. Karen Lewis briefed the fleet commanders on classified xenohistorical data. 200 years ago, humanity's first contact with the Altarian Republic had taught them valuable lessons about galactic politics. The Altarians had warned that aggressive species typically destroyed themselves or were eliminated by more powerful civilizations. Humanity had taken that advice to heart, but not in the way their alien mentors intended. Instead of becoming genuinely peaceful, humans had become patient. They had spent 2 centuries watching, learning, and preparing for the day when someone would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The Korath Empire had just crossed that line. Admiral Morrison opened a secure channel to the Zephyrian coalition. Ambassador Veltar appeared on screen, hope flickering in his silver eyes for the first time in months. Ambassador, this is Admiral Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. We have received your request for assistance and will be dispatching a fleet to your location. Veltar bowed deeply. Admiral, we are eternally grateful for any help you can provide. Even a small evacuation effort could save millions of lives. Morrison's expression remained neutral. Ambassador, I need you to provide detailed intelligence on Korath military installations, command centers, and leadership locations. The request puzzled Veltar. Admiral, are you planning some kind of diversionary attack to cover the evacuation? Morrison's reply would have chilled the ambassador if he had understood its full meaning. Ambassador, there will be no evacuation. Please provide the requested intelligence as quickly as possible. The human fleet departed Earth Space 12, hours later, moving toward the distant Zephyrian systems. To galactic observers monitoring the situation, it appeared that Earth was sending a token force on a hopeless humanitarian mission. The 12 ships seemed pitifully small compared to the massive Korath armadas that had crushed dozens of civilizations. What those observers didn't know was that humanity had just declared war on the concept of genocide itself. The Korath Empire had committed the one crime that humanity could never forgive or ignore. They were about to learn that when humans finally emerged from the shadows, they didn't come as saviors or liberators. They came as judgment. The human fleet moved through space with a silence that would have surprised any alien observer. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of Terra's Wrath, watching the stars shift as they approached the war zone. Captain Amy Foster ran her ship. With quiet efficiency, her crew preparing systems that hadn't been activated in decades. Dr. Karen Lewis entered the briefing room carrying classified files that revealed humanity's greatest secret. The assembled fleet commanders listened as she explained the true history of human expansion into the galaxy. What the public knew was only a small part of the story. 200 years ago, when we made first contact with the Altarian Republic, they gave us advice that probably saved our species, Dr. Lewis began. They told us that aggressive civilizations either destroyed themselves or were eliminated by superior forces. They suggested we adopt peaceful expansion and technological restraint. Colonel Danny Rodriguez nodded as he reviewed the historical documents. As head of Terran strategic planning, he knew the full scope of what had really happened after that first contact. The Altarians thought they were steering us toward genuine pacifism. Instead, they taught us the most important lesson in galactic: survival. The lesson had been simple but profound. In a galaxy filled with predatory species, the survivors were either the strongest or the most invisible. Humanity had chosen to become both while appearing to be neither. Captain Foster studied the technical specifications of her own ship. To external sensors, Terra's Wrath appeared to be a standard exploration vessel with basic defensive capabilities. The reality was that every system aboard the ship represented technology decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. "How long have we been maintaining this deception?" asked Commander Tony Walsh, the fleet's tactical coordinator. Dr. Lewis pulled up classified construction records. "The first generation of hidden warships was completed 60 years ago. We've built and maintained a secret fleet while presenting ourselves as peaceful explorers and traders. The deception had been remarkably successful. Human colonies spread throughout nearby star systems appeared to be small research outposts and trading stations. In reality, each installation was a heavily fortified military base capable of defending entire sectors of space." Captain Sandra Davis reviewed the intelligence reports from her command aboard Final Verdict. The Korath Empire had expanded for over a century by conquering civilizations that couldn't match their military technology. They had never encountered a species that deliberately concealed superior capabilities. "What changed?" asked Major Elizabeth Ross, commander of the fleet's Special Operations Forces. "Why reveal ourselves now?" Admiral Morrison answered with a gravity that silenced the room. "Because genocide is the one crime that requires an absolute response. We've watched the galaxy tear itself apart for 2 centuries, but systematic extermination crosses a line we cannot ignore. The human fleet consisted of 12 ships, each designed for a specific role in what was coming. Terra's Wrath served as the primary battleship, mounting weapons that could crack planets if necessary. Final Verdict carried systems designed to disable enemy fleets without destroying them. Righteous Fury specialized in surgical strikes against military targets. Commander Beth Taylor monitored Korath communications from her stealth ship Vengeance. The enemy was preparing for another assault on Zephyrian positions, confident that their superior numbers and firepower would overwhelm any resistance. They had no idea that a predator was approaching. Dr. Nina Thompson, the fleet's xenopsychologist, had spent months studying Korath society and culture. Her analysis revealed a civilization built entirely on the belief in their own military superiority. They had conquered so many species that defeat was literally inconceivable to them. Their entire social structure depends on the myth of Korath. Invincibility, Dr. Thompson explained. They've never faced a force that could match their capabilities, let alone exceed them. Major Paul Green prepared his special operations teams for the next phase of the mission. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were equipped with technology that would seem like magic to most galactic civilizations. Personal shields that could deflect starship weapons, armor that made them nearly invulnerable, and weapons that could cut through any known material. The approaching confrontation would serve multiple purposes. First, it would save the Zephyrians from extinction. Second, it would demonstrate to the galaxy that humanity was not the weak species they appeared to be. Most importantly, it would deliver a message that genocide would never be tolerated. Captain Jennifer Cole studied the tactical displays aboard Righteous Fury. The Korath had assembled their largest fleet in the Xerian system, preparing to eliminate the last major Zephyrian stronghold. Over 400 warships surrounded the planet, including their most advanced dreadnoughts and battle carriers. Admiral Morrison opened a communication channel to the entire human fleet. "All commanders, we are approaching the target system. Remember that we're not here to wage war. We're here to deliver punishment for crimes against sentient life." The distinction was important. War implied that both sides had legitimate grievances and goals. What the Korath had done was not war. It was the systematic elimination of an entire species for no reason other than their desire for conquest and resources. Lieutenant Commander Steve Mitchell ran final checks on Terra's Wrath's weapon systems. The ship's main guns utilized principles of physics that most species hadn't discovered. They could fire projectiles at near-light speed or generate energy beams that ignored conventional shielding technology. Dr. Alan Baker, the fleet's diplomatic advisor, prepared the surrender terms that would be offered to the Korath Empire. The document was simple and non-negotiable. Complete withdrawal from all conquered territories, release of all slaves and prisoners, payment of reparations to their victims, and acceptance of permanent monitoring to prevent future aggression. The terms were designed to be rejected. Humanity knew that a civilization built on conquest and dominance would never accept such conditions voluntarily. That rejection would justify what came next. Captain Louise Bennett reviewed the rules of engagement. From her position aboard the destroyer Swift Justice, human forces were authorized to use any level of force necessary to complete their mission. The only restriction was to minimize civilian casualties among the Korath population. "We're not here to commit genocide ourselves," Admiral Morrison had explained. "We're here to end it and ensure it never happens again." The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Xerion system. To Korath sensors, they appeared as 12 small vessels of unknown design approaching the massive enemy fleet. The size disparity was so extreme that many Korath commanders initially dismissed the humans as irrelevant. Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane, commanding the Korath forces, received reports of the approaching human ships with amusement. He had heard rumors about the species called humans. Supposedly, they were peaceful traders who avoided military conflicts. Their presence in a war zone seemed like a diplomatic mistake. Admiral Morrison began broadcasting on all frequencies in every known galactic language. His message was simple and direct. "Korath Empire, you have committed genocide against the Zephyrian people. This crime against sentient life cannot stand. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or face the consequences of your actions." The ultimatum sparked laughter throughout the Korath fleet. Surrender to 12 unknown ships? The suggestion seemed so absurd that some commanders wondered if it was some kind of joke or propaganda technique. Admiral Kane responded with typical Korath arrogance. "Unknown vessels, you are interfering in Korath military operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Admiral Morrison's reply would be remembered by every survivor of what followed. "Admiral Kane, you have 59 minutes to surrender. Use that time wisely." The countdown had begun, though the Korath didn't understand what they were counting down to. They saw 12 small ships challenging the might of their empire. What they couldn't see was that they were staring at the most advanced military force in the galaxy, operated by a species that had spent 2 centuries preparing for exactly this moment. Humanity had remained hidden in the shadows for 200 years, watching and waiting. The Korath Empire was about to discover that some shadows contained predators. The hour deadline passed with predictable results. Fleet Admiral Marcus Kane had spent the time positioning his ships for what he expected to be a brief and amusing battle. 400 Korath warships formed attack formations around the 12 human vessels, their weapons charged and ready to fire. "All ships, commence attack," Kane ordered with supreme confidence. The Korath had never lost a fleet engagement in their century of expansion. These unknown humans would learn why the galaxy feared their empire. The first Korath salvos lit up space with energy beams and missile swarms. The barrage was massive enough to destroy a small moon, concentrated on targets that seemed impossibly fragile compared to the firepower directed at them. Captain Amy Foster watched the incoming weapons from her position on Terra's Wrath's bridge. "Defensive systems activated," she announced calmly. The ship's shields engaged with a subtle shimmer that was barely visible to external observers. The Korath weapons struck human shields and simply vanished. Energy beams that could penetrate any known armor were absorbed without effect. Missiles that could crack battleship hulls exploded harmlessly against barriers that didn't even flicker under the assault. Admiral Kane stared at his tactical displays in confusion. "All ships, increase firepower. Focus everything on the lead vessel." The second barrage was even more intense than the first. Every Korath ship in the fleet concentrated their weapons on Terra's Wrath, generating enough energy to sterilize a planet's surface. The human battleship flew directly into the storm of weapons fire without changing course or speed. Lieutenant Commander Steve Mitchell monitored the weapon systems from his tactical station. The shield generators were operating at less than 5% capacity. The Korath were throwing everything they had at defenses that barely registered the assault. "Captain Foster, shall I return fire?" he asked. Amy nodded. "One shot. Make it count." Steve targeted the Korath flagship, a massive dreadnought that served as Kane's command vessel. The shot appeared as a simple beam of blue light, almost elegant in its simplicity. It struck the enemy ship and passed completely through its hull, shields and armor, as if they weren't there. The Korath flagship exploded in a brilliant flash that lit up the entire system. The most powerful warship in the enemy fleet was reduced to glowing debris in a single second. The Korath attack ceased as hundreds of enemy commanders tried to process what they had just witnessed. Their most advanced vessel, protected by shields that could deflect asteroid impacts, had been destroyed by a weapon they couldn't even identify. Captain Jennifer Cole took advantage of the enemy confusion. Righteous fury accelerated into the Korath formation, her weapons systems targeting the largest concentrations of enemy ships. Each shot destroyed multiple vessels, cutting through their defenses like they were made of paper. Captain Sandra Davis brought final verdict alongside a Korath battle group that was trying to retreat. Her ship's weapons didn't destroy the enemy vessels, they simply shut them down. The Korath ships went dark, their power systems disabled by technology they couldn't comprehend. Admiral Kane, now commanding the fleet from a backup vessel, watched his forces disintegrate around him. Hundreds of ships that had conquered dozens of civilizations were being destroyed or disabled by an enemy that seemed immune to everything the Korath could throw at them. "All ships, full retreat," Kane ordered. "Get us out of here." But the human fleet had positioned themselves to prevent escape. Every time a Korath ship tried to jump to faster-than-light travel, it found its engines mysteriously failing. The humans had somehow trapped the entire enemy fleet in normal space. Commander Tony Walsh coordinated the human attack from his position aboard the command vessel. Each human ship was assigned specific targets and objectives. This wasn't random destruction. It was a carefully planned demonstration of overwhelming superiority. Captain Louise Bennett used swift justice to shepherd fleeing Korath vessels back into the battle zone. Her ship moved with impossible speed and agility, appearing wherever enemy forces tried to escape. The Korath pilots found themselves herded like animals by a predator they couldn't match. Major Elizabeth Ross prepared her ground forces for the next phase of the operation. Her troops would board selected Korath vessels to gather intelligence and ensure that word of this battle reached the enemy high command. The Korath Empire needed to understand exactly what they were facing. Dr. Nina Thompson monitored Korath communications from her position aboard the intelligence ship. The enemy transmissions revealed panic and confusion throughout their command structure. Terms like impossible and unknown technology appeared in every message. Within 30 minutes of the first exchange, the Korath fleet was completely destroyed or disabled. Not a single human vessel had taken damage, while 400 enemy Ships had been reduced to wreckage or floating powerless in space. Admiral Morrison opened communications with the Zephyrian Defense Forces that had been watching the battle from their fortified positions on the planet below. Commander Veltar appeared on screen, his silver eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "Admiral Morrison, what we just witnessed, how is this possible?" Morrison's expression remained neutral. "Commander, this was a demonstration. The Korath Empire committed genocide against your people. That crime requires punishment." The distinction was important. The battle in Xerion's system wasn't meant to be the end of the conflict. It was meant to be the beginning of the Korath Empire's complete destruction. Captain Beth Taylor used her stealth capabilities to infiltrate Korath communication networks. She began broadcasting footage of the battle to every corner of the enemy empire, ensuring that their military leadership would see exactly what had happened to their supposedly invincible fleet. Major Paul Green led boarding parties onto several disabled Korath vessels. His soldiers moved through enemy ships like they were touring a museum, their personal shields deflecting desperate weapons fire from surviving crew members. They weren't there to kill. They were there to deliver a message. The message was simple and terrifying. "Surrender now or watch your civilization burn." Dr. Karen Lewis monitored galactic news networks from her position aboard Terra's Wrath. Word of the battle was already spreading throughout nearby star systems. Species that had lived in fear of Korath expansion were beginning to ask questions about the mysterious humans who had destroyed an entire enemy fleet. Captain Amy Foster received new orders from Earth Command. The demonstration phase was complete. Now came the systematic dismantling of everything the Korath Empire had built. Through conquest and genocide, Admiral Morrison opened a channel to the Korath High Command on their capital world. Emperor Zorak himself appeared on screen, his reptilian features twisted with rage and disbelief. "What are you?" the Emperor demanded. "What kind of species possesses such technology?" Morrison's answer was delivered with cold precision. "We are the species that responds when genocide occurs. Your empire has committed crimes against sentient life that cannot be forgiven or forgotten." Zorak's response revealed the arrogance that had driven his empire's expansion. "You destroyed one fleet. We have dozens more. The Korath Empire will crush you and add your technology to our own." Morrison's expression didn't change. "Emperor, you have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally, release all slaves and prisoners, and withdraw your forces from every conquered world. If you refuse, we will systematically destroy every military installation in your empire." The Emperor's laughter echoed through the communication. 12 ships against an empire? You are either insane or delusional." Morrison cut the connection without responding. The Emperor would learn soon enough that humanity didn't make empty threats. Commander Tony Walsh began coordinating the next phase of operations. Intelligence reports identified over 300 Korath military installations throughout their empire. Each would be targeted and destroyed within the 72-hour deadline. Captain Jennifer Cole received orders to lead a strike force against the Korath Naval Academy on Draknor Prime. The facility trained the enemy's officer corps and represented their military tradition stretching back centuries. Its destruction would send a message that nothing in their empire was beyond human reach. The Zephyrian survivors watched human preparations with growing amazement. They had called for help, expecting perhaps evacuation assistance or humanitarian aid. Instead, they had witnessed the complete annihilation of their oppressors by a species the galaxy had dismissed as peaceful and weak. Ambassador Veltar opened a private channel to Admiral Morrison. "Admiral, your people have done something unprecedented. How can we ever repay this debt?" Morrison's answer revealed the true nature of humanity's response. "Ambassador, this isn't about debt or repayment. Genocide is a crime against all sentient life. When it occurs, it must be stopped absolutely and permanently." The human fleet began spreading throughout Korath space, each ship carrying enough firepower to level planets. But their mission wasn't conquest or colonization. They were delivering justice to a civilization that had built itself on the suffering of others. The Korath Empire had 71 hours and 30 minutes to surrender. After that, they would learn what happened when humanity finally stopped hiding in the shadows. News of the fleet's destruction spread through the Korath Empire like wildfire. Commander Beth Taylor monitored enemy communications from her stealth position, recording the panic and confusion that erupted across their military command structure. Reports flooded in from surviving ships, all telling the same impossible story. Emperor Zorak sat in his throne room on Korath Prime, surrounded by his top military advisors. General Krikstal, head of the Imperial Navy, struggled to explain how their most powerful fleet had been annihilated by 12 unknown vessels. "My Emperor, the reports must be exaggerated," Krikstal insisted. "No species in the galaxy possesses technology that advanced. Perhaps the humans used some kind of experimental weapon that cannot be replicated." Zorak's reptilian eyes glowed with rage. The Korath Empire had built its power on the fear and respect of other species. If word spread that they could be defeated, their entire civilization would begin to crumble from within. Admiral Kane's replacement, War Marshal Draknor, commanded the Second Korath Fleet from his flagship Dominator. 800 ships assembled in the Brutus system, representing the largest military force the Empire had ever gathered. Surely no enemy could stand against such overwhelming numbers. Captain Amy Foster received intelligence reports about the massive enemy fleet, while Terra's Wrath moved through hyperspace toward the next target system. The Korath were doubling down on their military response, apparently believing that superior numbers could overcome superior technology. Dr. Nina Thompson analyzed the enemy psychology from her position aboard the intelligence vessel. "The Korath have never experienced defeat," she explained to Admiral Morrison. "Their entire worldview is built on the concept of inevitable victory through superior force. That worldview was about to be shattered completely, the human fleet divided into smaller task forces to cover more territory simultaneously." Captain Sandra Davis took final verdict toward the Korath stronghold world of Brutus Prime, while Captain Jennifer Cole led Righteous Fury to intercept enemy reinforcements moving toward their capital system. Major Elizabeth Ross prepared her ground forces for precision strikes against key Korath installations. Unlike the space battles, these operations would demonstrate humanity's ability to project force with surgical accuracy. Every target would be military, every strike would be precise, and civilian casualties would be avoided completely. War Marshal Draknor positioned his fleet in defensive formations around Brutus Prime, confident that 800 warships could overwhelm any attacking force. The planet below housed millions of Korath civilians and served as a major military production center. When the human ships emerged from hyperspace, Draknor initially couldn't locate them on his sensors. 12 vessels should have been easily detectable, but advanced stealth technology made the human fleet nearly invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Captain Davis announced her presence by broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies. "Korath forces, you are defending a world built on the suffering of enslaved populations. Surrender now and evacuate all military personnel or face the consequences." Draknor's response was swift and predictable. "All ships, attack formation, destroy the invaders." The battle that followed lasted exactly 18 minutes. The Korath fleet threw everything they had at the human ships, generating enough firepower to glass continents. Their weapons struck targets that seemed impossibly small and maneuverable, protected by defenses that made their assault appear meaningless. Lieutenant Commander Steve Mitchell coordinated the human response from Terra's Wrath. Each shot was calculated for maximum psychological impact. Instead of simply destroying enemy ships, the human weapons demonstrated their complete superiority over Korath technology. Some enemy vessels were cut in half by energy beams that ignored their shields. Others simply stopped functioning as their Power systems were disabled by weapons that bypassed conventional defenses. A few were teleported into empty space, their crews left to contemplate their helplessness. War Marshal Draknor watched his flagship's shields fail under a sustained assault that shouldn't have been possible. His ship's armor, designed to withstand direct hits from the largest enemy weapons, was peeled away layer by beams that cut through it like tissue paper. "All ships retreat," he ordered desperately. "Fall back to the capital system." But there would be no retreat. Captain Louise Bennett used swift justice to demonstrate humanity's complete control over the battlefield. Enemy ships attempting to escape found their engines mysteriously failing, their navigation systems scrambled, their communications jammed. The 800-ship fleet was reduced to debris and derelict hulks in less than 20 minutes. Not a single human vessel sustained damage, while the largest military force in Korath history was completely annihilated. Captain Davis turned her attention to Brutus Prime itself. Instead of orbital bombardment, she launched precision strikes against specific military targets. Weapons factories, training facilities, and command centers were destroyed with surgical accuracy, while civilian areas remained completely untouched. Major Ross led ground forces in a demonstration that stunned observers throughout the galaxy. 12 human soldiers beamed down to the planet's surface and walked through the Korath military like they were ghosts. Personal shields deflected everything the enemy could throw at them, while their weapons cut through fortifications that had stood for centuries. The soldiers weren't there to occupy territory or kill civilians. They delivered a simple message to the Korath garrison: "Your empire ends now. Surrender and live, or resist and join your fleets in oblivion." Dr. Alan Baker monitored the response from Korath High Command. Panic was spreading through their communication networks as reports flooded in about the complete destruction of their Second Fleet. Terms like impossible and unknown technology appeared in every transmission. Emperor Zorak received the reports in his throne room, his advisors trembling as they delivered news of their military's complete failure. The Emperor's rage was magnificent to behold, but it couldn't change the reality of their situation. "Send the Third Fleet," Zorak ordered. "Every ship we have. These humans cannot be everywhere at once." But Admiral Morrison had anticipated this response. The human fleet began appearing throughout Korath space simultaneously, striking at military installations across dozens of systems. Each attack was swift, precise, and utterly devastating. Captain Beth Taylor infiltrated the Korath communication network and began broadcasting footage of the battles to every corner of their empire. Citizens who had lived their entire lives believing in Korath invincibility watched their military forces being swept aside like children's toys. The Third Korath Fleet never reached its destination. Admiral Grixtal, commanding from the battleship Destroyer, received reports of human attacks throughout the Empire and realized that resistance was suicide. His ships were needed to defend the capital, not waste themselves in futile attacks. General Rick Murphy coordinated with liberated slave populations throughout Korath space. As human forces disabled military installations, they freed millions of beings who had been enslaved by the Empire's expansion. The galaxy was witnessing not just military defeat, but the systematic liberation of everyone the Korath had oppressed. Commander Tony Walsh monitored the Empire's communication networks and reported a crucial development to Admiral Morrison. "Sir, we're seeing the first signs of internal collapse. Several outer systems are declaring independence, and there are reports of slave uprisings on at least 6 worlds." The Korath Empire was crumbling from within as news of their military defeats spread. Species that had been conquered decades ago began rising against their oppressors, knowing that the supposedly invincible Korath military could no longer protect their installations. Dr. Karen Lewis documented the systematic destruction of Korath, military capability for Earth Command. In less than 48 hours, humanity had eliminated over 2,000 enemy warships and destroyed hundreds of military installations without suffering a single casualty. But Emperor Zorak, faced with the complete collapse of everything he had built, made a decision that would seal his empire's fate. Rather than surrender and face judgment for his crimes, he chose to ensure that his enemies would pay the highest possible price for their victory. The order went out to all remaining Korath forces: execute all prisoners, eliminate all slaves, and destroy everything that could not be held. If the empire was going to fall, it would not leave anything useful for the victors. Captain Amy Foster received intelligence reports about mass executions beginning throughout Korath space. Surviving military commanders were carrying out their Emperor's final order, killing millions of defenseless beings rather than surrender them to the advancing human forces. Admiral Morrison's expression changed when he read the reports. The restraint that humanity had shown up to this point vanished entirely. The Korath had crossed humanity's final line. All ships, Morrison announced on the command frequency. Mission parameters have changed. The Korath Empire has chosen to commit final atrocities rather than surrender. They have forfeited any claim to mercy or restraint. The reports of mass executions reached Admiral Morrison while Terra's wrath was en route to the Korath capital system. Intelligence confirmed that Emperor Zorak had ordered the systematic elimination of all prisoners and slaves rather than allow them to be liberated by human forces. Captain Amy Foster watched her commander's face change as he read the updates. The careful restraint that had characterized human operations up to this point disappeared entirely. What replaced it was something far more dangerous: the cold, calculated fury of a species that had reached the absolute limit of their patience. All fleet commanders, Morrison announced on the secure channel. The Korath Empire has chosen to commit final atrocities rather than surrender. They have forfeited any right to continued existence. The message was clear to every human officer who heard it. The mission had evolved from punishment to complete eradication. The Korath had made their final choice, and humanity would ensure they lived with the consequences for exactly as long as they deserved. Captain Sandra Davis received new targeting orders aboard Final Verdict. Every Korath military installation, government facility, and leadership bunker was now marked for total destruction. The surgical precision that had characterized previous strikes was replaced by systematic annihilation. Major Elizabeth Ross led her ground forces in liberation operations across Korath space, but now their orders included a grim secondary mission to ensure that no Korath official responsible for the mass executions would escape justice. The human fleet divided into task forces that struck simultaneously across the entire Korath Empire. What had taken the enemy centuries to build was dismantled in a matter of hours by weapons and tactics they couldn't comprehend or counter. Captain Jennifer Cole brought righteous fury into orbit around Korath Prime itself. The capital world housed over 3 billion beings, most of them civilian populations who had lived their entire lives under imperial rule. The distinction between guilty and innocent had to be maintained even in total war. Emperor Zorak watched from his palace as human ships appeared throughout his home system. The massive defense grid that protected Korath Prime represented the pinnacle of their military technology, orbital platforms mounting weapons that could destroy entire fleets. The defense grid lasted exactly 4 minutes against human assault. Captain Cole's weapons cut through shields and armor that had been designed to withstand anything the galaxy could produce. The platforms simply ceased to exist, reduced to expanding clouds of vapor and debris. Admiral Morrison opened a communication. Channeled directly to the Imperial Palace, Emperor Zorak appeared on screen. His reptilian features twisted with rage and desperate defiance. "You may destroy our military, but the Korath Empire will never surrender," Zorak declared. "We will fight to the last warrior, kill every slave, and burn every world before we bow to inferior species." Morrison's response was delivered with absolute finality. Emperor, you are correct about one thing. The Korath Empire will never surrender because it will no longer exist. The assault on Korath Prime began with precision strikes against military targets throughout the planet. Government buildings, command centers, and weapons facilities were eliminated with surgical accuracy, while civilian areas remained untouched. Major Ross led 12 soldiers in an assault on the Imperial Palace itself. They walked through Korath, defenses like they were taking a leisurely stroll, their personal shields deflecting weapons that should have been able to stop armored vehicles. The Korath Elite Guard made desperate stands throughout the palace complex. These were the Emperor's personal warriors, genetically enhanced and equipped with the finest weapons their civilization could produce. They died without inflicting a single casualty on the human forces. Commander Tony Walsh coordinated the systematic liberation of slave camps throughout Korath space. Human forces moved with impossible speed and precision, appearing wherever Korath troops were carrying out execution orders and stopping them with overwhelming force. Dr. Nina Thompson monitored Korath communications as their empire collapsed around them. The psychological impact of complete military defeat was devastating a civilization that had built its identity on conquest and dominance. Captain Louise Bennett used swift justice to hunt down fleeing Korath officials throughout their former territory. War criminals who had participated in genocide found that there was nowhere in the galaxy they could hide from human justice. The final confrontation occurred in Emperor Zorak's throne room. Major Ross and her soldiers walked through the massive doors to find the Emperor waiting with his ceremonial guard. The chamber had been designed to intimidate visitors with its vast scale and martial decorations. "You will not take me alive," Zorak declared, raising an ancient weapon that had belonged to the first Korath Emperor. Major Ross stopped 10 feet from the throne. "Emperor, you are responsible for the systematic extermination of billions of sentient beings. Your empire is built on slavery, conquest, and genocide. That ends now." The Emperor's final charge was pathetic rather than heroic. His weapon, designed to penetrate any known armor, struck Ross's personal shield and simply vanished. She didn't even move as he collapsed at her feet. But the true punishment wasn't death. It was forcing Zorak to witness the complete dismantling of everything he had built. Ross made him watch as human forces liberated every slave camp on Korath Prime. She made him see the faces of beings his empire had brutalized for decades. Captain Beth Taylor broadcast the Emperor's surrender throughout the galaxy. Species that had lived in fear of Korath expansion watched their former oppressors beg for mercy from a species they had never considered a threat. Dr. Alan Baker coordinated the massive humanitarian effort that followed the Empire's collapse. Millions of slaves were freed, billions of beings were liberated from Korath rule, and entire civilizations that had been conquered decades ago regained their independence. The Korath species itself was not exterminated. Their civilian populations were relocated to a small cluster of worlds under strict monitoring. They would be allowed to exist, but never again would they be permitted to threaten other species. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of Terras, wrath as the human fleet prepared to return to Earth. The mission that had begun as a response to Zephyrian pleas for help had ended with the complete destruction of a galactic empire. Ambassador Veltar addressed the Galactic Council 3 weeks later. The Zephyrians had called for help in their darkest hour, expecting perhaps evacuation assistance or humanitarian aid. Instead, they had witnessed the complete annihilation of their oppressors by a species the galaxy had dismissed as weak and peaceful. The humans came not as conquerors or liberators, Veltar explained to the assembled representatives. They came as judges. When faced with absolute evil, they delivered absolute justice. The galaxy struggled to comprehend what had occurred. A species that had maintained peaceful relations for 2 centuries had emerged from the shadows to destroy the most powerful empire in known space. The implications were staggering. Captain Foster received the final transmission from Earth Command as Terra's Wrath entered human space. Mission accomplished. Return home. Remember that what happened here remains classified. The galaxy isn't ready to know what humanity is truly capable of. The human fleet dispersed to their hidden bases throughout the solar system. To external observers, it appeared that Earth had sent a small humanitarian mission that had somehow succeeded beyond all expectations. The truth would remain humanity's secret. Dr. Karen Lewis compiled the final mission reports in her secure laboratory on Luna Command Station. The Korath Empire had been erased from existence in less than 3 weeks. Their military was destroyed, their government eliminated, their territory liberated, and their capacity for future aggression permanently removed. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Though most species didn't fully understand what they had witnessed, there were powers in the universe that preferred to remain hidden, watching and waiting for someone to cross lines that should never be crossed. Admiral Morrison returned to his quiet office overlooking Earth's blue oceans. The reports would be filed, the weapons would be hidden again, and humanity would return to its carefully maintained facade of peaceful exploration and trade. But now the galaxy knew, even if they didn't fully comprehend it, that some species responded to genocide, not with war, but with judgment. The Korath Empire had learned too late that when humanity finally emerged from the shadows, they didn't come as saviors or conquerors. They came as the final arbiters of justice in a universe that had forgotten what justice meant. And they would be watching, always watching, for the next species foolish enough to believe that genocide was acceptable.